People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up.
All right, so did you hear about the guy who could have been one of the richest men in history, co-founded one of the biggest companies in history, and walked away from a fortune that on paper would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars today? This guy's name is Ronald Wayne. And Ron is 41 years old when the story starts in the spring all the way back 1976. And he is working at Atari, the Pac-Man company, in Sunnyvale as chief draftsman designing arcade casings, the cabinets. And around the office, he's got a reputation. He's known as the meticulous one, the detail guy, the guy who reads contracts twice and makes sure every I is dotted, the guy who proofreads everything before it goes out. He's also a guy who 5 years earlier watched his own company fail. So if we back up 5 more years, in 1971, Ron started a small business making slot machines for the Nevada market. He's always loved sort of the Vegas life. And it failed inside a year. He ended up owing money to suppliers, to clients, to people who had trusted him. And a lot of people at this point would have just filed for bankruptcy and walked away clean. Ron is a different type of guy. He did not do that. He said if I owed money, I was gonna pay it. And he paid every dollar back himself out of his own pocket. And it nearly wiped him out and took him years to get back on his feet. And all of that hassle and effort taught him something he was never gonna forget. When a partnership goes under, when a business goes under, the partner who has money is the one who pays. All right, so we're back now in 1976 at Atari. And Ron meets a 21-year-old kid there named Steve Jobs. Jobs is also constantly arguing with a friend, a 25-year-old engineering savant named Steve Wozniak, who is building computers in his bedroom for fun. Woz works at HP and has just designed one of the most elegant personal computer boards anyone has ever seen. Jobs wants to sell it. Woz wants to just give the design away, and they can't agree on anything. So Jobs asked Ron to come to his apartment one night to help mediate between the two. After a long conversation, Jobs has talked himself into starting a company with Woz and with Ron. 10% of this company goes to Ron. His job on paper is to be a tiebreaker. His job in reality is to keep these two kids from just fighting with each other. So on April 1st, 1976, in Ron's living room, with Woz's friend Randy Whittington standing by, Ron sits down at his typewriter and writes the founding agreement of Apple Computer Company himself. 2.5 pages. Jobs signed it, Woz signed it, and Ron signed it. Apple now existed. And Ron, by the terms of this document, is now a general partner in a business with two guys who have never run a company. Now, he's general partner on paper, and in California law, that means something very specific. If the business ever takes on debt and goes bankrupt, the creditors come for all three partners equally. Remember, Jobs at this point had nothing. He's working out of his parents' garage. Woz had nothing. He was just moonlighting on free time from working at HP. Ron, who was older, has a house. Ron has a car. Ron has a checking account. Ron has a credit history that he spent the past 4 years rebuilding from that slot machine disaster. So he's thinking to his head, if Apple owes someone any amount of money, that bill's gonna land on Ron's doorstep alone. And 11 days later, it looks like that's exactly what's going to happen. So back in the 70s, in the Bay Area, there was a computer store. It was called the Byte Shop, BYTE. And they had just placed an order for 50 Apple I computers for about $25,000, payable on delivery of all those machines. But to fill this order, they didn't have the money for parts. So Jobs walked into a place called Kramer Electronics, it was a parts distributor, and convinced them to extend Apple $15,000 of parts on 30-day credit. The plan was probably pretty obvious: build the computers with said parts, deliver them, get paid by the Byte Shop, pay Kramer back, and pocket the difference. Ron was not convinced. The Byte Shop was kind of a brand new retail chain at the time, and their owner had a reputation that Ron didn't love for maybe not paying bills back on time. This part of the story was kind of light on details. And if the Byte Shop did not pay on delivery, Apple would then owe Kramer $15,000 for parts they couldn't sell. all three founders on the hook equally for that $15,000. Now Ron's thinking to himself, I've seen this scenario before. I was in this play in 1971, and I don't want to ever star in this again. So this story is about to get, I think, even wilder, but I do want to take a quick break to thank the sponsor for helping keep the lights on here, but stick with the story, because the choice Ron's about to make next is the most expensive 12 days in business history. And then if that wasn't enough, the second deal he makes years later that somehow makes this all work. All right, so speaking of Ron, the guy whose job was reading contracts twice and then proofreading everything before it left the office, he was the documentation guy. Now that exact pile of work, the email and the admin grind that sort of buries every careful person in every American company, AI can finally handle in 2026. And today's sponsor, Zapier, is how I got it working. So Zapier, if you've never heard of him, connects 9,000 apps. And the piece worth showing you is the Zapier MCP server. So it sounds complex, but in plain English, whichever AI tool you use, the big ones, Claude, ChatGPT, whatever, calls out to Zapier MCP to reach your real app. So your Gmail, your Slack, Calendar, Notion, so your AI can actually read the stuff and then act on it. So here's what I built. I called an email triage agent. So every morning, Claude reads my Gmail, stores everything into needs reply, FYI, and just garbage junk, and drafts the replies that matter. And that's it. Setup is like 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know how to code. I didn't write a single line of code. Works with any LLM and handles anything in your stack, not just email. If you want to check it out, links in the description, even including the template I built to try it yourself. Now back to Ron, who was about to make one of the worst trades in business history.
If you're not having fun doing it, you don't really love it, you're going to give up. The ones that are successful loved what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane.
So Ron, I'm assuming sitting down on his couch or his desk, looks up at this guy and does some math in his head. Apple owes $15,000 on parts. Bite Shop has a bad reputation for paying people on time. Apple has no inventory. They don't really have customers beyond this one shaky order. They've got two co-founders with empty pockets, and Ron's name on a partnership agreement that makes him personally liable for every dollar of it. So, Ron makes a decision. On April 12th, 1976, so just 12 days after typing the original founding document in his own living room, Ron files a one-page amendment with the Santa Clara County Registrar's Office. He signs it, Jobs signs it, and Wozniak all sign it. And not a single one of them tries to talk Ron out of it. This amendment that they signed dissolves Ron's 10% stake in what was called at the time the Apple Computer Company. Now, Ron didn't walk away with nothing. For his cut, Ron got $800 in cash. Now, $800, 1976 money, in today money, it's about $4,500. So it's not a little bit of money, but it's also not life-changing money. But it is real money for a guy who 5 years earlier had drained all of his savings paying off that failed slot machine business. And allegedly, he took those bills, put them into his wallet, and he drove back to work at Atari. A few months later, Bite Shop paid. Apple made the loan back, and the company Ron had just escaped from is against all odds, like still kicking. But Apple is not yet done with Ron. In January of 1977, Jobs and Wozniak incorporate the business as Apple Computer Inc. And they brought on a new investor named Mike Markula, who's about to put up about $250,000 to kind of get the company going. Also wants to bring in real lawyers and look at the old paperwork. Before his corporation closes, those lawyers kind of want the loose ends buttoned up. They want Ron Wayne to sign away any possible future claim he could ever bring against a new corporation for anything that he might have done. The original partnership agreement, the Apple I manual he worked on, the first logo even, the 2.5-page document he typed on his own typewriter. All of it, those lawyers wanted Ron's claim on any of that to be gone in writing. So Apple sent Ron a check for $1,500 and a release. Ron signed it. So if you're keeping track of the math in your head, that is $2,300 in total. That's the entire amount Ronald Wayne ever received for the 10% of Apple he gave up. And he walked away clean. There was no partnership, no liability, no future claim, nothing. And now we all know how the story plays out, But in Ron's mind, on that day, he dodged a bullet. Apple sells the Apple II later in 1977 and goes on to change the personal computer industry forever. Apple in 1980 goes public at a valuation of around $1.8 billion. Steve Jobs at the time ended up being worth about $217 million on paper by the end of that year. He was just 25 years old. Ron Wayne, 1980, back at Atari. Now, this is where most people stop the story. If Ron's 10% had somehow stayed intact all the way through dilution and IPO and 4 decades of equity issuance, with Apple now trading around $4 trillion in market cap, his original stake would translate on paper to hundreds of billions of dollars today. That would put him in the conversation with the richest people on earth. Above Bezos, above Gates, above Buffett, above every sort of founder you can think of. Ron sold his 10% for $2,300. The arithmetic does the rest. It is arguably the worst trade in business history. But the story is not over. In the mid-90s, Ron's a little short on cash. He still has the original founding document he typed in his own living room in April of 1976 with all 3 signatures on it. So he sells it to a manuscript dealer for $500. Now, that document changes hands a few times, and in 2011, that same document goes to auction at Sotheby's. The auction house estimates it's going to sell for $150,000. The hammer comes down at $1.6 million. The winning bid was a billionaire from Miami. So Ron, of course, doesn't see a cent of it. He sold that contract free and clear in the 90s. The dealer who bought it from him for $500 turned around and sold it again. And whoever was holding it in 2011 walked out of Sotheby's a millionaire. So whatever happened to Ron Wayne? So now he lives a quiet life in Pahrump, Nevada. He sells stamps and rare coins out of his house, and he plays penny slots at a local casino. The first Apple product he ever owned was an iPad 2 that someone gave him at a conference. And every few years, reporters drive out and they ask him the same question. Same question I would ask him. Do you regret it? Any of it? And it'd be easy to be salty, to be mad, and to be upset. And every time, supposedly in a very calm manner, he gives the same answer. No. He says if he stayed at Apple, he would have been the documentation guy, the one writing manuals and managing logistics, while Jobs and Woz built the future. He says the stress of trying to keep up with 2 20-year-olds would have been the end of him. He says that he was standing in the shadows of giants. And he claims he would have ended up the richest man in the cemetery. He says he made the best decision he could have with the information he had at the time, and he sleeps fine every night.